I've written two programs here, one in JavaScript and one in PHP. And I'm going to show you the PHP program first because that's what we've been learning. And then I'm going to compare how JavaScript would have done basically the same thing. And you'll see a lot of similarity in the code, but first let's start with the PHP program. I've got it pre-pasted up here, and I'm going to go ahead and run it by hitting the Enter key. And we have a little thing here. It says enter first name, and it's got the word none down here. And you'll see why in a minute, why it says none. I'm going to just put my name in there and hit the display message button. It comes up and says, you must be the instructor. Well, how nice. I am. Put in John and hit display message. You must be the student named John. Now remember the first time that I put in Steve, I capitalized it the way I normally do. I'm going to put it in lowercase and see if it still recognizes me as the instructor. And it does. So let's go look at the code. Here's the PHP code, and you have method post, and this is a recursive program, so it keeps calling itself over and over again. And enter the first name, the text, the submit button, just what you were pretty much expecting. The first thing we do is in this div is I run a function called display message. Let's go look at the function. It calls a function right off the bat, get form info, and returns something into $display HTML. And whatever it returns, I display it because I print it here. So let's look at get form info. I set up a variable with a paragraph of the messages in it, and then I check to see that the field is set. If so, I go ahead and get it into the variable. You've seen this before. Now, one thing I do here is a string to upper function on the first name, and I save that off into a first name UC variable. And then I compare that to a capital Steve. That way, it doesn't matter how the user enters Steve. It'll always be doing an uppercase to uppercase comparison, and if it's Steve in any form, it'll always be true. And that's why it recognizes that I was the instructor. And likewise, else it goes and checks that you're the student named whatever you put in there. And this message none is just on the first time when it comes through. So, nothing more than that. It's a pretty straightforward program. Let's go ahead and look at the JavaScript version of this. Now over here I have saved in a tab the JavaScript version. Now notice here it's the same program name except I have .html here. I'm not running any PHP whatsoever. Let's try putting in the name. Steve. Display message. You must be the instructor. Let's try John. John. Display message. Student John, and we'll go ahead and do the Steve again lowercase and see if it still recognizes me. And it does. You must be the instructor. Now, one of the things right off the bat with JavaScript is I can take you into TextPad again and look at the code, and I'm going to do that. But JavaScript is just displayed within the HTML file, and you can't really hide it. I'm going to right-click on my page here and do a View Page Source, and I can see all the JavaScript code that's in there. So it's not secure the way PHP can be. So remember that. Don't ever put anything in there that's security related or something you don't want the rest of the world to see. As I may show later, you can put the JavaScript code in a file and then link it to pull it in, but even that can be usually found pretty easily by a snooping user, so you don't want to use JavaScript for anything involved with security. Let's go to the code. I'm here, that's the PHP. Let me go to the other tab to where I'm in the HTML file. All right. I've got functions, just like I had in PHP. First of all, this JavaScript is specified in the heading area of the page. If you go all the way down, you can see the ending head area. And it is also displayed within something called a script tag. Now, we have been using PHP script tags with the question mark PHP and that sort of thing, but here we just use the word script, and then at the end we use end script. And that will indicate JavaScript for us. Now, here's a function called display message and a function called get form info. Before we come back and look at it, remember that just like any function in PHP, nothing happens in a function unless it's explicitly called. So let's go back and see where it's called. I have a form here, and I'm not really calling a PHP program, so I just put the word dummy in there. So I've got the normal input type. I changed the submit button to be just button because I don't want it to try to submit this form to the server. We don't need it for what we're doing. Now, down here I have an empty div called message div. And now, it doesn't have a name of message div. It has an ID of message div. That's very important to remember. We have names and we have IDs. In fact, if you look at what I've done here, the input type equals text, I have a name first name, and I also have an ID first name. Tools like Dreamweaver that help generate some HTML for you, there's usually a little checkbox that you check on your form that says, make the name and ID the same name. And that's usually a good box to check, because in most cases, that's exactly what you want. It'll simplify the coding as you go between PHP and JavaScript. PHP has needed the name value, but JavaScript, more often than not, is going to need the ID value. So you might as well give them the same attribute value name. It makes coding just a bit simpler. So one other change I made here compared to what we had before is I added something called onClick to the button. This is going to tell the button that when you click me, go call this JavaScript function, display message. So let's follow that through. I click the button, let's go all the way back to the top, and here's display message. So it says right off the bat, go run this function. Remember that everything to the right of the equal sign happens first. Let's go down to get form info. It formats messages just like we had before in the PHP program. But notice the variables. They don't have a $sign on them like we did in PHP. You don't ever use a $sign on a JavaScript variable. But you do say the keyword var the first time you're using a variable. That declares to the program that a variable is going to be used of this name. There are rules about scope and that sort of thing, but I'm not going to get into them here. Now, here's a key function. getElementById. Now, what it does is it goes and looks for an element, like an input tag or whatever, that has the ID value of first name. And I just got done pointing out to you that I gave that input tag an ID of first name, so it gets that. And then it gets its value. The value of the element is whatever the user typed in. The element itself can be gotten without the value, and then you can do things to it, change its color, move it around, that sort of thing on the web page. Now, this getElementById doesn't live by itself. It lives as a part of something called the document. The document is essentially the viewable area of the page. So you have to use the syntax. These dots here, they're not like the dots in PHP. That meant concatenation. But in this case, we're not concatenating anything. This is object-oriented language, and it basically says this function is a part of the document, or more specifically, a part of the document object. So we got the first name variable. We have the same thing before, first name UC, only without the $sign. Now here's another difference with JavaScript. Instead of saying string to upper first name, you actually put the function at the end of the thing that you want to affect. So here's this dot operator again. So I say, make uppercase the object over here. So this acts on this, and then it returns a new value over here. The if statements are just like PHP. Really no difference other than that the variables don't have a $sign on them. You still use two equals and use the same kinds of operators. Now concatenation, instead of a dot, when you want to concatenate text together, JavaScript uses the plus sign. So plus equals is like a shortcut for dot equals in PHP. It's saying message equals message plus this string. So it's a shortcut for that. So plus in JavaScript is what is used for string concatenation. So you must be the instructor, you must be the student. Now look, here's another plus. It's saying you must be the student named, and then it shows who the student is. So in PHP, I would take that out and I'd put a dot there. It's very easy to get confused when going between JavaScript and PHP coding about these little rules. But try to retain these, and we're going to go through a few more examples here to help you understand what you can do in JavaScript and what's best done in JavaScript and what's best done in PHP. This ends our lesson in comparing JavaScript to PHP.